please, all stand. This coroner's court is now sitting.
Good morning. Yes, Mr Harker.
Good morning, Your Honour. I call James Ferguson, who will be giving evidence today by AVL.
Mr Ferguson, can you see and hear us?
Yes.
Right, you'll just hear from the court officer.
Silence, please. Do you swear by Almighty God that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say, I do.
I do.
Thank you.
Mr Ferguson, would you please state your full name?
James Stewart Ferguson.
Your address?
I've just moved. It's now Victoria Road, 651, Millthorpe.
And your occupation?
Rural contractor.
Are you a member of the New South Wales Rural Fire Service?
Yes.
As a member of the Palmers Oakey Brigade?
Yes.
Were you a member of the Palmers Oakey Brigade in December 2019?
Yes.
I'll take you to that date now. You received a call from Chris Schofield about a fire.
Yes.
About what time was that?
Lunchtime.
Did you say midday?
Yes.
And what did Chris say?
He said there was a fire at Bingletree.
And is Chris a member of the Rural Fire Service?
He is now. I'm not sure then.
Did he tell you how he became aware that there was a fire at Bingletree?
I don't remember how he told me.
And where were you when you received the call from Mr Schofield?
At my father's place, 80 Palmers Oakey Road, having lunch.
How far away is that from Bingletree?
As the crow flies, about 4 k's.
Did you leave immediately to travel to Bingletree?
As soon as I had water available and was equipped to go, yes.
And how long did it take you to drive? How long from the moment that you received the call to when you arrived at Bingletree?
I'm estimating about 30 minutes.
And the vehicle that you drove, was that Chris Schofield's work ute?
Yes.
It had a weed sprayer on the back?
Yes.
I'll come back to that in a moment. But did you approach the fire from the south?
Yes.
So you drove through a property known as Eldrickham Springs?
Yes.
Did you see smoke to the north?
Yes.
And you drove through Eldrickham Springs to the location of the fire?
Yes.
And did you drive along Tobin's Oakey Trail?
Yes.
And did you drive along Tobin's Oakey Trail to the boundary of Eldrickham Springs with Bingletree?
Yes. I didn't get to the boundary.
Where did you stop?
I'm estimating 250 to 300 metres prior to the boundary.
And where was the fire at that point?
It was in front of me on the eastern side of the Tobin's Oakey Fire Trail.
Was it in the creek?
It was most of the active fire was on the eastern side of the creek.
And was it ascending up the hill on the other side of the creek?
Yes.
How far was it up the hill?
I'm estimating 300 metres.
Did you have a view at all of where the fire had been near the boundary fence from that point?
Not straight away, but when I proceeded over to the eastern side of the creek to start fighting the fire, you could see where the fire had been on the western side.
And what did you see from where the fire had been?
It had all burnt out heading from the boundary fence.
Was there any burnt vegetation to the south of the boundary fence?
A little bit.
So just bring it back for one moment. When you're referring to the boundary fence, is this the boundary fence that runs east to west across the property?
Yes.
And it separates Bingletree from Eldrecam Springs?
Yes.
And most of the vegetation that was burned was to the north of that boundary fence?
Yes, definitely, because there were people on foot trying to contain the fire, and there was another vehicle there with some sort of firefighting equipment on it.
What were the people doing on foot trying to suppress the fire?
They were putting it out with shovels and by foot from memory.
Were they associated with the RFS?
Not to my knowledge.
And you referred to another vehicle. Was that vehicle equipped with a similar spray unit to what you had on your ute?
I didn't get close enough to it to determine what it was, but I think so.
How effective were the individuals that you saw in suppressing the fire?
They were achieving a fair bit on the southern western side of the fire.
But was the fire getting away from them?
Yes.
So so withdraw that. The vehicle that you were driving with Savage had a spray outfit in the rear of the ute.
Yes. It had 600 litres of water with 2 hose reels with 200 metres of hose on each reel.
Have you operated a similar sprayer previously?
Yeah, that's part of my job, was using that outfit.
You use it quite often.
Yes.
I'll show you some photos now of another vehicle, which are at tab 46 of the brief. We'll just bring them up on the screen for you, Mr. Ferguson. We'll start on page 986.
I can see the first one, yes.
Yeah, so I'll just run you through a few photographs. Just assume they're all the same vehicle. And I just want you to make particular note of the tank, the red tank in the rear trailer.
Yes.
The next photo, please. And following photo. And one more photo, Mr. Ferguson. So that tank, is that a similar size, water tank, is that a similar size to that on the back of the vehicle that you were driving?
Yes.
Mr. We just might mention the page number just for the transcript.
Oh, sorry, Your Honour,
That's
this is page 989. So do you estimate that it's about 600 litres?
Yes, I would say it's a 600 litre tank. It looks like a standard quick spray supply thing that comes with 600 litre tanks.
And if you're using a spray unit like this for firefighting purposes, as you did, and you're using it constantly to suppress a fire, assuming that the tank was full, how long would you say it would take before the tank would run out of water?
That is a very hard question to answer, depending on your flame height and the amount of fuel load that's there. Look, to empty a tank flat out, it would take 45 minutes with both guns going, as an estimate.
So if it was half full, it would take about half of that, roughly.
Yes. It depends on your nozzles. There's lots of factors involved in that. That's an estimation.
And to use a unit like this effectively, you need to activate the pressure gauge to ensure there's sufficient water pressure coming out of the hoses. Is that correct?
Yes.
And is that similar to what I'll show you now on page 991 of the brief? Would you need to turn a lever like this to activate the pressure?
Yes.
And if you don't, sorry, Mr. Ferguson, please continue.
There's two parts to that. There's a knob that is sort of horizontal that you wind to increase or reduce the pressure. The one that is sort of straight up and down, use the one that you actually engage whatever pressure you set.
Thank you. And if you don't do that, what is the effect on the pressure of the water coming out of the hoses?
It's like not really turning a garden tap on or just turning it on so it's running out, it's dribbling. You don't get any real pressure to knock the fire down.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. Now, turning now to the weather conditions on the day, how would you describe them?
From memory, they were horrible. The wind was changing direction. It was very low humidity. Yeah, it just was a shocking day.
Would you describe it as dry?
Oh, yeah, we were in the middle of a drought. That would go standard. It's the worst I've seen in my lifetime and the worst my father had seen in 80-something years.
And did you make any observations of the fuel that was available on Bingletree and Eldrickham?
Yeah, there was a fuel load. I wouldn't say it was unbearable, but it was a low fuel load. But yeah, the fire at the time was only about 30 centimetres in height where it was burning.
Did you see much serrated tussock on the site?
That area is commonly known with a fair bit of serrated tussock, yes.
Was it dry at that time?
Yes.
Would you describe it as highly combustible?
Yes, definitely.
I think you say in your statement to the police, you mention at one point that the fire hit a patch of Saratoga tushy and then spread quite quickly, and that's at page 578 of the brief, Your Honour. When you refer to Saratoga tushy, is that serrated?
It's supposed to be serrated tussock.
Thank you. And I'm not going to keep you for much longer, Mr. Ferguson. You say in your statement to the police that you've carried out fencing work before?
Yes.
And you acted as a fencing contractor?
Yes.
Have you constructed many fences using star pickets, wires and strainers?
I couldn't tell you how many kilometres, but several kilometres of fencing, yeah, in the hundreds.
And has that involved the installation of metal strainers and stays?
It is basically all that is used these days. There's very few wooden posts used.
And would you usually weld these stays to the strainer posts?
It depends on each job. Yeah, weld or use clamps, depending on conditions of what the farmer wants.
Are clamps as strong as welding?
I believe welding is better. That's my personal opinion.
And when you've welded in the past, what measures did you put in place to minimise the risk of fire?
Tried to have some sort of fire suppressant there, like a quick spray or something to wet the ground down and put the fire out. Or a 20-litre drum full of water.
In your experience, would you have been welding on this day, the 4th of December 2019, given the weather conditions and the dryness of the tussock on the site?
Yeah, I probably would have, if I needed to weld, I would have welded first thing in the morning. Just wet the area down and gone ahead. It wasn't a total fire ban, so you would have to be there on that day in that position to know what to do.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. There's just one preliminary matter which I should have clarified initially. You attended an interview with the police on the 9th of October, 2020.
Sorry, I missed the start of that question.
Did you attend an interview with the police on the 9th of October, 2020?
I believe that's when I made my statement, yes.
And have you read your statement recently?
I haven't read it in the last week.
The last time you read it, were there any corrections? The last time you read it, were there any corrections that you wanted to make to it?
Yeah, there's one that it states that I believe there was enough people there to put the fire out. I believe that only because we were denied aerial support. We didn't have a choice.
Are you able to say where that is? Have you got that in front of you, Mr. Ferguson?
I would have to read through the whole thing to find out where it is.
Oh, that's all right. That's all right. Don't worry.
I've no further questions.
Yeah, that's fine. We've got your evidence now. Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. I'll just see if there's any other questions, first of all, before you go. Mr. Newton? Oh, actually, I might go to Mr. Mellor first.
Thank you, Your Honour.
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honour. Very briefly, Mr. Ferguson, you've just explained the one of the steps you would have taken if you found yourself in a position of welding on the 4th of December 2019, being that you would have wetted down the ground. Am I right to understand that you would have also ensured you had a fire suppressor to hand if you were in that situation?
Yeah, I would have, on that sort of day, I would have had like a quick spray. That were in those photos present, and I normally have someone welding and someone standing there ready to go to wet the area down more if there is a fire start.
And just to clarify that, you would have had a quick spray like the one in the photographs you've just seen?
Yes.
And that would have been immediately to hand?
Yes, I would have had it parked there, mowed, pressure on, ready to go.
Thank you, Your Honour. That's...
Thank you, Mr. Mellor. Mr. Newton?
No questions, Your Honour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ferguson. You're excused.
Thank you.
You're all right. Call Michael Grabham.
Mr. Grabham, can you see and hear us?
I can.
Right. Just hear from the court officer now.
Silence, please. Do you swear by Almighty God that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say, I do.
I do.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Harker.
Thank you, Your Honour. Mr. Grabham, would you please state your full name?
Dr. Michael Kevin Grabham.
Your occupation?
I'm right here.
And your business address?
Around 2544 Sapala Road, Wagon.
You're a member of the New South Wales Rural Fire Service?
I am.
You hold the rank of Captain of the Wattle Flat Safala Bushfire Brigade?
I did at that time, yes.
What is your rank currently?
I'm currently a Deputy Group Captain.
And when you said at that time, were you referring to the 4th of December 2019?
I am.
And you attended an interview with the New South Wales Police on the 23rd of October 2020?
That's correct.
Have you read the transcript of that electronically recorded statement recently? And are there any corrections that you would like to make to that statement?
There's numerous typographical errors and transcription errors throughout it, but yeah, I think the intent of the statement was correct.
Anything of substance that you'd like to change?
Not that is immediately apparent to me.
So starting, I'll just focus firstly on the weather conditions around the time of the fire. So in the months prior to the fire on the 4th of December 2019, how would you describe the weather conditions in Upper Turon?
I can't speak about specifically Upper Turon, but in the general area, it had been, terrible fire conditions. We've had numerous total fire bans during that period, and conditions weren't great, that's for sure.
In the days prior to the start of the fire, was that consistent with the weather conditions? Were they the same as the month prior?
Yeah, my recollection was that the day prior to the fire was a total fire ban day, and I believe the day after was a total fire ban day as well.
So just to clarify, I didn't quite hear that. Did you say the day before was total fire ban day?
That's correct.
And the day after?
My memory it was, yes.
But not the day of the start of the fire?
It's the day of, not the day of the fire.
Thank you. So on the 4th of December 2019, do you recall what the fire danger rating was on that day?
I know that we had some concern about the chopping and changing of total fire ban days. It seemed, and obviously there's a metric that it's worked to, but certainly conditions were equally as bad on that day as they had been previously. I guess there was some minor adjustment which meant that it wasn't a total fire ban on that day.
So on the day, would you describe the conditions as dry?
Absolutely.
Hot?
Yes.
Low humidity?
Yes.
And what were the prevailing winds on the day?
Well, I can't recall specifically. I know from the where the fire went that it was dominated by westerly winds.
So on the 4th of December 2019, you were notified of a fire in Upper Turon.
That's correct.
Do you know roughly when you were notified?
I can't recall specifically, and I can't recall how I would have been notified, but it would have been through a pager, and so that record would be there as to when that notification came through.
And from where you were, you travelled to the Sofala Brigade Station.
To Wattleflat Station.
And you and Michael Cole then travelled in the appliance tanker Wattleflat 1 to the site of the fire. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you drove to a property named Bingletree?
That's right.
And did you approach Bingletree from the north?
We approached Bingletree, I guess it's from the west.
Did you enter Bingletree from a property known as Eldrickham Springs?
I believe that Eldrickham Springs is to the south of Bingletree.
That's correct. So you came from the opposite direction?
So we came from the north from Bingletree Station, which is on the Upper Turon Road, and headed south along the I think it's the Tabor Lakey Bike Trail towards the south into Eldrickham Springs.
And did you stop at the boundary of Bingletree with the property to the south?
We didn't stop anywhere. We just went straight to the fire.
And where was the fire when you arrived?
It was on the eastern side of Tabor Lakey Creek, I believe it's called. Heading up the hill towards Timbered Country.
I'll just show you a photograph. Could we please bring up page 972 of the brief? We can bring it up on the screen for you, Mr. Grabham. Can you see that photograph?
I can.
And when you're referring to the hill, is that the in which the fire was at the time you arrived? Is that the hill in the background?
I'm just trying to orient myself, orientate myself here.
So you can see it.
We're looking due east from this perspective of the photo.
That's correct. I'd like you to assume that the fence that you can see in the foreground is the fence that separates the properties of Eldrickham Springs and Bingletree and runs from east to west.
Yeah, and I assume this photo is taken from the road. Is that correct?
Oh, sorry, I didn't quite hear that. It broke up slightly.
I assume that this photo is taken from the road.
Just to the west of Tobin's Oakey Trail.
Yeah, okay. Yep, I recognise the location.
And was the fire in those hills in the background?
Yes, it was, when we arrived, it was to my recollection was to the south of that location.
On the property?
On the opposite
property.
side. On the opposite side.
Sorry, Mr. Graham, I cut you off. Could you please finish what you were saying?
I believe it was to the south, across the creek on the eastern side of the creek, and to the south of that area in that open country that you can just see starting on the extreme top right-hand corner of the photograph.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. Were you the first official RFS vehicle on site?
I believe so.
And did Brendan Cole shortly follow?
Yeah, Brendan arrived shortly after.
And when you drove through the properties, what was the nature of the fuel that you observed on the site?
I think it's fairly evident in that photo, really. It's open growth, grassland country.
So sorry, what was that?
Surrounded by green timber.
Did you observe much serrated tussock on the property?
Well, pretty much everything you can see in that photo is serrated tussock.
Would you describe it as very dry on the day, the serrated tussock?
For sure.
Would you describe it as highly combustible?
Yes.
And I think you state in your statement to the police that it was a severe fire hazard. Do you still hold that view?
I do.
So when the fire was progressing up the hill when you arrived, what was the flame height?
I can't recall specifically, but it wasn't huge, something less than a metre, I would suggest.
What was the nature of the wind at the time?
Well, I don't recall specifically. It was a westerly wind pushing the fire to the east.
Was it progressing quickly at the time that you arrived?
It was certainly moving. Yeah.
And when you arrived, did you see anyone fighting the fire?
I did. There was a quick spray unit on the eastern side of Tobin's Oakey Creek, and other people to the southeast of that location. How many and numbers I can't recall.
So I was breaking that down. The quick spray unit, how many people did you see operating the quick spray unit?
I couldn't, there was at least one.
And what were the other people that you observed to the southeast? What were they doing?
I can't recall. I don't recall if there was any firefighting equipment per se, as in a tank or so I'm not sure what they were doing or what equipment they had. My focus is on getting to the front of the fire at that point.
Did you see any people working on fencing?
When we came back out, there was some contractors working at the site. I'm not sure whether it was the principal contractor or their employees, but they were rolling out some hinge joint wire fencing while we were fighting the fire.
I'll just show you a map now, Mr. Grabman, which I think you've seen before, on page 654 of the brief. We'll just bring that on the screen for you. Can you look at the bottom right-hand corner? Is that your signature?
It is.
And you signed this on the day of your interview with the police?
I did.
And did you draw the lines in blue and red pen on the map?
I did.
And I think I can make out some black texture as well. Is that what you did as well?
Yes, I believe so, yeah.
Just
I think the
break-
black text of it mentioned the quick spray, was it?
So if we can zoom in on the black texture, please. So there's 4 X's as far as I can see there. Can you see them, Mr. Graben?
I can.
And which X demarcates where the quick spray was located?
The large X.
And the 3 smaller X's, what are they meant to signify?
They represent the other people that were on site, and I can't specifically, I don't recollect how many people or what equipment they had or anything. I was just aware that there was people in that vicinity.
I understand. And the blue line, that's where you drove that day
Yeah, that's right.
into the fire ground. So when you came back out from fighting the fire, and you said you saw people working on fencing, where on this image would that have been?
You can see that red circle.
Yes.
So directly south of that, about where the line goes into the track, along that vicinity there somewhere.
So not in the red circle, but south of the red circle.
That's right. They're working along the edge of the track.
Did you speak to those contractors at all?
I did.
And before you spoke to them, did you recognise any of them?
No, I didn't recognise any of them.
When you spoke to them, did you ask them what the cause of the fire was?
I did. I asked them specifically how the fire had started and where it had started.
And what did they answer when you asked them where it started?
They pointed in the general vicinity of where I had deduced that the fire had started on arrival, back to the north of where I got that red circle.
And how did they answer the question how it started?
They said they were unaware of how the fire had started.
So you said prior to that you deduced that the fire had started near the area of the red circle.
Yes.
How did you come to that view?
Just the way that the fire had gone, the wind direction on that day, and the terrain.
So from the point of the red circle, where had the fire travelled from there? Was it to the north of the fence line?
My recollection was generally to the east, across the gully, and subsequent to that, it headed north and into the timbered area and away.
Just to clarify, the black texture line that runs across most of the satellite image, did you draw that?
I don't recall whether I drew it or whether Officer Griffiths did.
That's okay. Is that meant to signify the fence line between the 2 properties?
Yeah, I assume that that's the property boundary.
And the following day, did you return to that area to try and identify the likely source of the fire?
Yeah, I don't specifically recall if it was the next day, but certainly within that near time frame, I was back there as the sector leader on the western side of the fire, and I did go down and inspect that area where I deduced that the fire had started.
Did you do that alone or with another person?
I was alone.
And when you walked to that location, what did you observe of the likely point of ignition of the fire?
I deduced that the fire had started around where the fencing works have been undertaken. There's specifically a strainer post right on the boundary where the new fence was coming off. And with my experience of fencing, I guess I assumed that the fire had started at that location.
Just to I'll show you an image now, Mr. Grabham, on page 654 of the brief.
That's the same image?
It's it. Oh, sorry, Your Honour, 954. Which is in volume 4. So you mentioned a strainer post before, Mr. Grabham. Is this the strainer post that you saw on that day of your inspection?
Yes.
And the likely point of ignition that you deduced for the fire, was that on the other side of what appears to be the old fence?
So that's the boundary fence?
Yes.
I'm guessing, yes. So I expect that it started at that location.
Thank you. And you mentioned before that you'd done fencing work before.
Yeah, that's right. My landholder, I do fencing.
Sorry, that broke up slightly. I didn't quite hear it. What did you say, Mr. Grabham?
I'm a landholder, I do fencing.
And have you installed fences using star pickets, strainers and wire?
I have.
And did that involve the connection of stays to the strainer post?
Yes.
Did you connect the stay to the strainer post by way of a weld?
I usually use clamps, but I do secure it with a weld.
And what's your view in terms of the strength of clamps relative to weld?
It's more a convenience factor. So, as I said, I do secure the clamp with a weld as well.
When you have welded in the past a stay to a strainer post, what precautions have you taken to minimise the risk of fire?
It depends on the day. But if there's a risk of fire, I always carry a knapsack and I wet down the area before I undertake any welding work or grinding work.
You said it depends on the day. On the day of the 4th of December 2019, would you have been welding?
I would certainly be taking great precaution if I was.
So, and the precautions that you mentioned, you would have wet the area down with the use of a knapsack beforehand?
That's right.
And would you have also had anything with you in case a fire did ignite?
Absolutely.
And what would that have been?
Initially a knapsack to wet down the area and provide some level of firefighting equipment and preferably a firefighting appliance nearby, so like a farm firefighter or something.
Your Honour, I have no further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Mellor, do you have any questions?
Just briefly, Your Honour, yes. Mr. Grabham, you've given evidence about a conversation with some fencing contract after you'd been fighting the fire for some time.
That's right.
You've given evidence that that conversation happened at the location just south of the red circle on the map that my friend showed you.
That's correct.
Do you recall, and tell us if you don't, how many fencing contractors were party to that conversation?
There's two, to my recollection, there was two contractors. They were rolling out a roll of inch joint wire along the side of the road.
And you clearly recall there being just two contractors.
That's my recollection. Yeah.
Thank you, Your Honour. Nothing further.
Thank you. Mr Newton.
No questions, Your Honour.
Thank you very much, Mr Grabham. You're excused.
Thanks.
Mr Castleton.
My pleasure, Your Honour. Your Honour now has the benefit of the documentary material contained within the brief of evidence tendered as Exhibit 58A, as well as the oral testimony of Detective Acting Inspector Glenn Griffith, New South Wales Police Officer in charge of the investigation, Shane Bryant, Fire Investigator with the New South Wales Rural Fire Service, the civilian witnesses, Jamie Edwards, fencing contractor working on Eldrickham Springs at the time the fire commenced, Mark Turner, subcontractor of Mr Edwards, also present when the fire commenced, Chabelle Tanous, part owner of Eldrickham Springs, Spencer Morgan, employee of the Tanous brothers, owners of Eldrickham Springs, and the New South Wales Rural Fire Service members James Ferguson, RFS volunteer, and Michael Grabham, RFS captain at the time, who were both involved in the early firefighting efforts. At a later stage in Your Honour's inquiry into the 2019-2020 bushfire season, those assisting Your Honour will formally address Your Honour on the cause and origin of the Palmer's Oakey fire. In that regard, can I foreshadow now that formal submissions are likely to be made that the cause of the fire on 4 December 2019 was due to an accidental ignition caused by a spark or sparks from welding equipment being used to weld together a new metal strainer fence post to a new metal stay post on a property situated at 1620 Upper Turon Road, Upper Turon, and known as Eldrickham Springs. The spark or sparks from the welding equipment appear to have ignited serrated tussock in close proximity to the new metal fence posts, causing a fire to start, which has then quickly spread and become established. It is believed that the area of origin was the new metal strainer fence post located at latitude and longitude coordinates 33 degrees 8 minutes 15 seconds south, 149 degrees 48 minutes 43 seconds east, which is essentially located along Tobanoki Trail between the property's Bingle Tree, situated at 1616 Upper Turon Road, Upper Turon, and Eldrickham Springs, situated at 1620 Upper Turon Road, Upper Turon, New South Wales. Could I invite Your Honour to formally stand over this matter to the 5th of September 2022?
Yes, I do that now. Thank you, Mr Castleton.
Your Honour, that concludes the Palmer's Oakey Upper Turon fire inquiry. For the benefit of my learned friends, the court won't be sitting tomorrow, but will resume hearings in relation to the southern region. Monday, the 27th of June 2022, Your Honour will inquire into the origin and cause of the Good fire. And then on Tuesday, the 28th of June 2022, Your Honour will resume the inquest into the death of Michael Clark. And then on Wednesday, the 29th of June 2022, Your Honour will commence Your Honour's fire inquiry into the Creewar cluster. May I please, Your Honour.
Thank you, Mr Castleton. Unless there's anything else, we will adjourn.
Your Honour, just informing you that Ms Woodland will be appearing on behalf of my clients from Monday through to Wednesday.
Thank you, Mr Newton.
Thank you, Your Honour.
Thank you. We'll adjourn until Monday the 27th of June, and we will be sitting at Lidcombe 10 a.m. Thank you.
May I please the court.